Good morning. This is African American Studies Intro with Coach Arnold. We are still in the African kingdoms. This is part 4. All right. So when we last left off, we were talking about Nubia. The kingdom of Moray is also a part of Nubia. You guys, this was from 800 BCE to 350 CE, and it was part of Egypt. This kingdom was the Nubians, or also known as the Kush, who actually ruled that 25th dynasty of Egypt. Okay, so the Nubian kingdom actually had their capital in Napta, and this kingdom at one point in time had been known by the Moray people, or excuse me, the kingdom of Moray. Okay. Napta was heavily influenced by Egyptian culture. Remember that those cultures are heavily influenced and infused together because of the Nile River. Okay, so this Nile River goes through Egypt and it goes through Kush or Nubia. Okay, and they are going to trade with each other and conquer each other at different points in history as well. All right, so your Moray, this was the dynasty of matrilineal families. So instead of the ruling in the family line going by men, it was by women. Okay, so it wasn't the king who was influential, but the queens. They did dominate trade routes going up and down that Nile River, and unfortunately, this kingdom is going to decline with the shift of the trade and then the rise of the Ashkum kingdom, which comes in and invades them and ends up taking their land. Okay, so the Ashkum end up being these nomads who end up coming in and settling and conquering. All right, remember that your Nubians are also going to have pyramids similar to the Egyptians. Keep in mind that there are more narrow and they are also smaller than the Egyptians, but they do have the same premise and idea behind them, which is to serve as a tomb for those kings and queens. Okay. Our next kingdom is Songhai, and this is going to go a little bit further back to the Mali kingdom. It is going to grow out of Mali. With one of their kings, or excuse me, with a prisoner named Sunny Ali, who was a prisoner in the Mali kingdom. He breaks out, he ends up conquering one of their cities, and then goes on to conquer other territories as well. The Songhai Empire is going to have a strong navy that patrols up and down that Niger River. They are known for their powerful military skills. And that main city is Gao. That is where Sunny Ali came from. And he goes on to help with conquering Timbuktu and Djinni. Okay, you guys, Timbuktu is going to be extremely important to all of these different civilizations, especially on the West Coast, because it was this big cultural hearth and this place of opportunity and learning and development. This kingdom is going to do a great job with trading along the Atlantic coast. They're going to shift that trade not just by land, but also by water. They do eventually get defeated by the Spaniards and the Moroccans. And this is that area that used to, some of it was Mali, some of it goes on to be Ghana, or excuse me, some of it was Ghana as well. Okay. So they are led by Sunny Ali once he breaks free, and he leads them on to be successful warriors. They do conquer quite a bit of land. You guys, they control that Niger River with their navy. They're also going up and down the coast. But unfortunately, Spain, who's a little bit above here, comes down and does eventually end up conquering them. They also end up getting into slave trade as well. This is where they're taking most of these slaves from their surrounding villages and areas that they're conquering. They're taking those people and they're actually using them to trade and to walk their resources all the way across the Sahara Desert to Egypt and other parts of the Sahara major cities where they can trade those resources. It is a little bit later that they actually start to ship those slaves off to Europe. Okay. All right, so traditional West African culture, a lot of this is not written down, so there isn't much that's known. And what is known is passed down with oral history. All right, so oral history is going to be the concept of speaking and talking and handing that information down generations to generation through stories. You get griots. These are people who are responsible for passing down the oral histories and stories. And if you guys remember with the Mansa Musa and Siddhartha Kita, if your father was a griot, then you would become a griot. So these griots are trained from a young age. They learn the stories, they record the stories. That way they can share them and keep passing down that history. Okay. The family, religion, and the culture. Your extended family, these are your close relatives. So, of course, you have your immediate family, your mother, your father, and your children. And then your extended goes a little bit further with your grandparents and possibly your aunts and uncles. Okay. So, people are grouped based off of their age. So, depending on how old you are, that is the task or the job that you are responsible for. That is just kind of how the family is set up. With their religion, they are animism, which is kind of polytheistic. They believe in natural objects, have spirits. They believe in multiple gods, depending on which kingdom you're looking at. And then a big part of that culture, because of that animism and because of the polytheistic belief in these gods, they do mask wearing. Okay, so you do get a lot of African masks being made, and they represent different things depending on what's going on. Okay, so here are a couple of more examples of these different masks. And once again, these masks can be for representing different animal gods. They can be for representing fertility. Maybe it's a marriage and that ceremony is going on. These are used for war as well. Some of them are used for greeting births of children. It really just depends on the culture and what is going on with the different masks. All right, your kingdoms of East and South Africa. We've talked about East Africa just a little bit, but you guys remember that your first humanoid is found in East Africa, going back to that idea of radiation, that all life comes from Africa and eventually we migrate and spread out. They are going to have a lot of different landscapes. You have mountains, savannas, you have the deep valleys here. And then, of course, in Egypt and Nubia, you have desert. Okay. They are going to be heavily influenced by the Persians or your Indians, which is considered Asia. But they're going to trade the ivory, slaves, and different animals with your Persians and your Indians. Because of their trade with the Asians, they do get a lot of Arabic influence. So you have Arabic traders who end up coming into Africa and they start marrying these local women. So the culture starts to get infused heavily in East Africa. You also have your Chinese who come over for ivory. Ivory at this time was ceremonial for them. So they would come into East Africa and get those. And of course, with that, you have the influence and the spreading of more culture. Okay. So these are just some of your Eastern and Southern kingdoms. Remember, we've talked about Egypt, Nubia. Okay. You got Sudan down here. And then when you get into the Bantu kingdoms as well, but these are your main Eastern and Southern African kingdoms. All right, Swahili culture. So Swahili is located in Southeast Africa, and it is the blend and the combination of that African and Arab cultures. All right. So before the Arabic arrived, everything was kind of known as like community. Everything belonged to the community. There was no individual ownership like this is mine before the Arabic. So before the Arabic, everything was everyone's and they shared it. After the Arabics, they brought with them that idea of having individual ownership. So things do slightly change for them on that front. Your Arabics also introduced the concept and the religion of Islam. They're also going to bring with them their alphabet and their written language. So Swahili culture is going to start to pick up on these, and the history, these stories, all this information is going to start being written in Arabic. They're going to start practicing Islam, and ownership is going to now become an individual thing. They're going to adopt the different clothes and other parts of that culture. Okay. All right, so Swahili, you do see the women who are fully covered out of respect to the religion of that Muslim faith and belief. You still have that African influence, though, of painting your faces and other tribal aspects going back to their tradition. The food is heavily influenced as well, where it is still some traditional African dishes or some similarities to what you see in West African dishes. You also see a lot of that influence from the Arab, from Persia, and from India as well. Okay. And one of the bigger differences is the skin. So you can tell like the skin is still pretty dark, but you can definitely tell that there is Arabic blood. Okay. Some other kingdoms that we need to talk about include Central and Southern Africa, your Congo kingdom. This is established near the Congo River. They did trade with the Portuguese, and you guys, they are dense in the dense forest, that dense rainforest. And then you have your Bantu people. Okay, so Bantu does come out of West Africa. However, it does end up in South Africa. They do migrate and they bring in their languages. Um, and it's different languages, okay? But these different people were moving to the South because they're trying to escape those outsiders, the Europeans. The population's getting heavier, and then some of these kingdoms, as they're expanding, they're taking over these tribes and, of course, selling them. So Bantu migration is one of those escapes, and it does end up leading them into Southern Africa. These Bantu people, when they migrate, they definitely bring a lot of their culture. Okay, so you still see a lot of African influence and culture in this particular region. As you guys can see, they still wear a lot of the traditional clothing today. Can still find a lot of statues. They still create and make a lot of these statues representing different warriors. You still get the traditional dance. And these people, their culture isn't heavily influenced by Europeans. It is pure Bantu language. It's very, very much the stereotypical aspects of Africa that you see as far as like mask and dress and things like that. All right, so Great Zimbabwe, this is one of the Bantu kingdoms. It is birthed out of the Bantu migration. And they are not going to, they are going to be one of those few, sorry, let me get my words together. Okay, so they are an extremely advanced civilization, but unfortunately, they are one of those kingdoms that gets European influence on them. Okay, so they do end up getting the European conquer, having the Europeans conquer them, and then take slaves from this particular area. All right. Um, because of that, even now today, you can still see the European influences. You can still see, I don't want to call it the damage, but you can still see the changes because of Europeans being in this particular area. Okay. However, they did hold very closely to their culture as much as they could. You still see them wearing those traditional masks. You still have the traditional ceremonies going on out here, where at a certain age, they send the boys off to become a man. They send them off into the wilderness, and they have all of that as well. Okay. One of your most famous Zimbabweans, and I did put her on here because she also represents for Africa as well in the movie Black Panther. But she is from Zimbabwe, and a lot of that culture was put into the movie. All right, so this is all I have for you guys for the African kingdoms. Don't forget, Zimbabwe comes out of your Bantu, which is one of your Central and Southern African kingdoms, along with the Congo. You guys, Swahili culture is throughout the southeast part of Africa. In East and Southern Africa, you've got a lot of influence from Persia and India, which leads to that Swahili culture. Remember that traditional masks are worn in various regions of Africa, mainly West Africa. You got a lot of culture that is here, the way that the families are structured, the way that they work together to create and to provide for everyone. Your griots, they are the ones who are recording that history. It is oral. Not a lot of it is written down, so it's passed down from generation to generation. Remember that your Shanghai kingdom is going to come out of West Africa as well. It's going to be led by Sunny Ali, and it's going to be birthed out of that Mali kingdom. All right. And you guys, we talked about Nubia, also known as Kush, and how it was heavily influenced by the Egyptians. And that is all I have for you guys for part 4. So until next time, when we get into part 5, this is once again Coach Arnold with African American Studies and your African Kingdoms. Have a great one.